which is Sarveshwara, or one who is the Lord of all lords. Several gods are mentioned in the Hindu mythology. Each god has an area of responsibility, and he administers his area of responsibility. Indra, for instance, is a god who is the Lord of heaven. Lord Vishnu is the Lord of all such lords also. He is the supreme Lord. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad describes Vishnu as the Lord of Lords. So we'll visit this one at the end. To the eyes of Mr. Joseph Campbell, we'll invite him to come and speak to us. So I'm going to be playing a recording of Joseph Campbell here to understand the God of Gods, Sarveshwara. So we will take a small departure or a deviation and understand and appreciate the roles and responsibilities behind this name Sarveshwara, or God of Gods. And we'll hear from Joseph Campbell and learn about Indra, the CEO of gods, if you will, and what trouble he gets into. And those troubles is something we ourselves experience as well. So let's learn a little more. So just like these gods described here, who each have a duty or an area of responsibility, like water supply, air quality, making sure the four seasons are cyclically running. Now, when performing such duties in our own work life too, right? We have our own work life too, and private life too. We too have a certain role and a certain area of responsibility, and we execute it. And when we execute such duties, we expect a fair degree of reward as well, natural. And many times we are rewarded too. That's fabulous. But once so often, we feel the reward or the remuneration was not good enough. A less deserving person, or say a junior, got promoted ahead of you. And of course, as a consequence, you get dejected. You no longer are engaged in the area of work or the duty that was on you, and you are less motivated to perform anything that is there. And what happens eventually is, what do? You resign and you leave. But now let's say the opposite happens. You become enthusiastic, you're engaged, you're communicating with others, and you'll be effusing with ideas that you look forth every day to bring to the table of discussion. But in the earlier case, you were burdened to yourself when things didn't go to the you're brushing your teeth, you're thinking of ideas, you're bathing, you're thinking of ideas as to how you're going to solve a problem, and you're thoroughly engaged. But in one case where things didn't happen, you became a burden on yourself, right? I've had a conversation in one of the weddings where we eventually found, while talking to another person, of a common person we knew, and that person, of course, is much senior. They're retired, and they were retired at the time I met them. So this common person is what she took reference to, who was no longer there alive, and she took mention that, oh, he got superseded by a junior, after which he was in complete dejection and he had got heart attack and he died. But which meant the very person that you went to work for, you're no longer there to that family to oversee and be with them and be responsible for the comfort of them. So which means you become a burden to yourself in one case. But now the opposite happens. What happens there? But here too, there is suffering, not to you, but to people around you. One, of course, is very natural, that the person who also coveted for that reward is now jealous of you. So that is one immediate measure of impact of people around you when good things started happening to you. But you now also, the second thing that happens is, you now have become a burden to the folks working around you, who now have to deal with the changing directions of your ideas and what you want to do, which I call is as a problem we see of a leisure, problem of leisure, which means there was this movie, I think, called Googly in Kannada, in which this girl says, see, if you love me, you should behave like Shah Jahan, who built a Taj Mahal for his lover or his wife, Mumtaz. So he very funnily responds saying, if all his neighbors were attacking him, he would not even have time to scratch his head. He would be busy battling, forget building Taj Mahal for the wife. He would be busy battling the life or his enemies there. So there is leisure, and that's when he did all this other stuff. I have no time for that. I have work to do, is what it says. So when the thing I would want to repeat again here is, so when labor merely tires the body, without interesting the mind, the man will utilize that leisure largely in search of external excitement, and in pursuit of that external excitement, I think all of us, we become a burden to others. So any labor we pick should also be fathomed to also interest the mind, and not just physically be engaged, which consumes, where your time passed, but it should also enrich us as well. So let's learn through the narration of the story of Indra himself, who, having won the battle with his enemy, is now at leisure and goes on to bother his architect to build a new app, right? I'll call it that way to meet the current context. So he's now got leisure, he has finished his battle with his enemies, he has conquered them, and now is after his architect because he wants to leave behind a legacy of his. So, but in absence of the reward, so he, we talked about, hey, you got rewarded, you got something where you become a burden on others, but you didn't get reward, you become a burden to yourself when you're not rewarded. So, but in absence of the reward, he gets dejected and he abandons his job or role of duty. But in further counseling, I'll call it further counseling by the HR department with his own wife, that being duty bound, so this is beautifully narrated there, that when you're duty bound is the best reward than reward bound. In your mind, if you're duty bound, the rewards are better when your mind is duty bound than a reward bound, or what we, I think, have heard, Nishkarma Phala Hetuhu. That's how it keeps coming up. So let's hear the story of Sarveshwara, or the responsibility of this name, to the voice of Mr. Joseph Campbell. So let me get that.
And there's a wonderful story in one of the Upanishads, the Brahma Vaivarta Upanishad, of Indra, this god who is the counterpart really of Yahweh. He is the god patron of a certain people and of historical life and time, with all kinds of rules for people to live by and that sort of thing. And there was a time when a great monster named Rutra had closed all the waters of the earth. And so there was a drought, a terrible drought. And the world was in very bad condition. Well, it took this god, Indra, quite a while to realize that he had a box of thunderbolts there, and all he had to do was drop a thunderbolt in Vritra, and that would blow him up. And when he did that, of course, he blew Vritra up, and the waters flowed, and the world was refreshed. And he said, what a great boy am I. So thinking, what a great boy am I, he goes up to the cosmic mountain, which is the central mountain of the world. And so he decided he would build a new world up there, a new city, and particularly his palace was going to be a palace worthy of such as he. So he calls Vishvakarman, the main carpenter of the gods, and gives him the assignment to build this palace. So Vishvakarman goes to work, and in very quick order he gets the palace into pretty good condition, and Indra comes. But every time Indra arrived, he had bigger ideas about how big and grandiose the palace should be. And finally Vishvakarman said, my gosh, he said, we're both immortal, and there's no end to his desires. I'm caught for life. So he decided to go to Brahma, known as the creator, and complain. Well, now Brahma sits on a lotus. This is the symbol of divine energy and divine grace. And the lotus grows from the navel of Vishnu, who is the sleeping god whose dream is the universe. So here's Brahma on his lotus, and Vishvakarman comes to the edge of the great lotus pond of the universe, and down he tells his story. Brahma says, you go home. He said, I'll fix this up. So next morning, at the gate of the palace that's being built, there appears a beautiful blue-black boy with a lot of children around him, just in admiration of his beauty. So in comes the boy. And Indra on his throne, he's the king god. He says, young man, welcome. And what brings you to my palace? Well, says the boy with a voice like thunder rolling on the horizon, I've been told that you're building such a palace as no Indra before you ever built. And he said, I've surveyed the grounds and looked things over. It seems this is quite true. No Indra before you has ever built such a palace. Well, Indra says, Indra's before me, young man. What are you talking about? The boy says, Indra's before you? He says, I have seen them come and go, come and go. He said, just think. Vishnu sleeps in the cosmic ocean. The lotus of a universe grows from his navel. On there sits Brahma, the creator. Brahma opens his eyes, a world comes into being. Governed by an Indra, closes his eyes, the world goes out of being. Opens his eyes, the world comes into being. Closes his eyes, and the life of a Brahma is 432,000 years, and he dies. The lotus goes back, another lotus, another Brahma. And then think of the galaxies beyond galaxies in infinite space. Each a lotus, with the Brahma sitting on it, opening his eyes, closing his eyes with Indras. There may be wise men in your court who would volunteer to count the drops of water in the oceans of the world or the grains of sand on the beaches, but no one would count those Brahmas, let alone those Indras. And while he's talking, there comes in parade across the floor of the palace an army of ants in perfect range. And the boy laughs when he sees them. And Indra's hair goes up and he says to the boy, why do you laugh? And the boy says, don't ask unless you are willing to be hurt. And Indra says, I ask, teach. The boy says, former Indras all. Through many lifetimes they rise from the lowest conditions spiritually to highest illumination. And then they drop their thunderbolt in Vritra, and they think, what a good boy am I, and down they go again. And then Indra sits there on the throne, and he's completely disillusioned, completely shot, and he thinks, oh, let's quit the building of this palace. He calls Vishwakarma and says, you're dismissed, you don't have to. So Vishwakarma got his intention. He's dismissed from the job, and there's no more house building going on. And Indra decides, I'm going out and be a yogi and just meditate on the lotus feet of Vishnu. But he has a beautiful queen named Indrani. And when Indrani hears this, she goes to the priest, the chaplain of the gods, and she says, now he's got this idea in his head. He's going out to become a yogi. Well, says the Brahmin, come in with me, darling, and we'll sit down and I'll fix this up. So he talks to Indra. They come in, they sit down before the king's throne, and he tells him, now, I wrote a book for you some years ago on the art of politics. You are in the position of the king. You are the position of the king of gods. You are a manifestation of the mystery of Brahman in the field of time. This is a high privilege. Appreciate it, honor it, and deal with life as though you were what you really are. And with this set of instructions, Indra gives up his idea of going out becoming a yogi and finds that in life he can represent the eternal in the way of a symbol, you might say, of the Brahman and the ultimate truth. So each of us is in a way the Indra of his own life. And you can make a choice either to go out and in the forest and meditate and throw it all off, or stay in the world and in the life either of your job, which is the kingly job of the politics and achievement, and as well in the love life with your wife and family, you are realizing the truth. Now, this is a very nice myth, it seems to me.
Thank you again for the patience there. We will, that was an enjoyable story is what I think, but we will stick to our timelines. So let's move on with acknowledging there, through the story of Indra, who had his moment of delusion of rewards over duty, right? I think that's what we all go through as well. It's very human in nature. And why call it human in nature? God seems to have the same nature as what you could derive from it. But just like Indra got counselled that duty bound is the best reward than reward bound, and to imagine that it's the work of the great Narayana that you are performing than the very work that you think you are bringing to the table. So you offer everything to him and you move forward. And now let's go